I'm Sean Anderson. I'm from Association Reserves. I have been a reserve analyst. I know we have not a lot of time, so I'll go quickly. I've been a reserve analyst for 25 years, all 25 years with Association Reserves. I've run our Orange County office for 21 years. So I've been doing this a long time. My Orange County office does about 700 reserve studies a year. So we're very familiar with the area of Orange County. And let's get started. So I'm going to talk you through National Reserve Study Standards of what components we fund for and why. So the first thing is we have a new 3-part test. We used to have a 4-part test, and reserve analysts all got together with CAI members, and everybody said we need to simplify this, particularly after the crash or the collapse of Champlain Towers South in Surfside, Florida. We wanted to make sure that components that should be in a reserve study are in there, including inspections, and that's going to be important for us in California, and we'll talk about it a little bit because of the decking bill that was brought up earlier. So what we want to look at is it the association's obligation? In other words, is it common area? Patrick talked about not funding for or not replacing somebody's couch because they had a water leak. That's not the association's responsibility. It wouldn't be proper to use reserves for that either. Needs and schedule can be reasonably anticipated. That's going to be we used to say within 30 years, but we've extended that. It could be around 40 years. We want to be able to anticipate cycles. Cycles are a big deal in a reserve study. The total cost for the project material can be estimated. This goes to predictability. We want to be able to predict the cost and the lives. And that includes, and this is another change, related costs. So we want to look at these things as projects. We're not just replacing the pool heater. We're replacing the pool heater as a project. So we're going to pay for the labor for the pool heater. We're going to pay for incidentals. One of the things that's changed is California has influenced the rest of the country. We in California know that we need to have an on-site reserve study every 3 years because of the Davis-Sterling Act. Now, National Reserve Study Standards are telling the rest of the country, hey, you got to follow California's lead. It's best practice to have a reserve study every 3 years. So, no change for us in California. We want to make sure that our reserve analyst is inspecting all the readily inspected assets, roofing, painting, garage doors, stuff like that. It's important to note, though, we do not do destructive testing. So we're not going to find things that can only be found in destructive testing. It's observational only. More than visual, we do want to do in-depth stuff. We want to look at mechanical stuff like that. But again, no destructive testing. When we do find the damages like this on this decking, we want to document it and report it to the client. Something odd or extreme, same thing. We want to make sure that we are noting it, we are letting the client know. Usually that's going to be to the manager and saying, hey, this is what we found. So what's happening is those costs in the reserve study are going to continue to go up. I think a theme we've seen so far today is costs are going way up for our associations. And from a reserve point of view, it's consistently going up, and it's far more dramatic than it was 4 years ago. So what we do is we see that all of these are included, and one of the things that we want to stress is if you have a project that needs a supervisor, like a lot of my clients have large asphalt projects, include a project manager in that to make sure that and include that in reserves to make sure that project gets done properly. So let's talk about prioritizing your reserve expenses. These are the expenses that we see. You have some that are inconsequential, some that we need to reevaluate, some that are just cause of obsolescence, some that are absolutely for protection of our assets, and then others that are catastrophic. So let's talk about the inconsequential ones. Those of us who have a pool building usually will have a shower attached to it, and they usually have a water heater that's attached to that shower. It's rarely used. I always tell a story that, and I'll make it quick. When I was on the board of my association, we had a water heater, we had a shower, and there was a guy that every morning would get up, take all of his clothes off, and shower in the pool shower every single morning. And our board president lived with a view of the pool shower. So every morning she'd be out having her coffee, and she's watching this guy shower. But it was consequential to her. But if that fails, and our association is very poorly funded, and we don't have the money to do that, or let's just say it's working just fine, that's not our priority. It's inconsequential. If this fails, it's not going to really affect the health and well-being of our owners. Other things like we have this fencing that we can look, now maybe the reserve study says, hey, this fencing should be at the end of its life. We see that there's been some repairs and stuff like that. But we just had a fencing guy come out and say, you know what? We can put new support posts here, and that's going to last another 4 years. We say, go ahead, reevaluate that, increase the remaining life, especially if we've done the repairs. Increase the remaining life in the reserve study and take those funds and put them more towards things that need to be done. And in this case, what we've done is repairs that are going to increase the remaining life of the asset. So go ahead and pay for that from reserves and increase the remaining life in the reserve study. And then we have things that just get obsolete. So a lot of the times I'll have clients, and this scenario is usually because of a clubhouse or a lobby. And it's usually something that the association sees as the first impression that people are going to see when they get to the association. A lot of my clients want to rehab their lobbies every 10, 20 years. And so that's another one that's somewhat optional. That this looks fine to me. I would be fine walking into this lobby. This client in particular thought it was dated and they wanted to do it. So that's appropriate for them to do. Now, protection is where things get very interesting. Here is a situation where this association did no preventive maintenance. So we're talking about protection now. We should be slurry sealing our asphalt every 4 or 5 years. If we don't do that, we're going to see these kinds of failures, and this is the consequence of that. And what we found when we did an analysis of it, to replace an asset that you don't need to replace versus maintaining it, it's 10 times more expensive. It's 10 times more expensive to resurface or replace this asphalt than it would have been just to slurry seal it every 4 or 5 years. So we want to make sure we are doing that maintenance on these assets. Now the important one is where it's going to affect the life and safety of our owners. So this association has a water heater that has gone down. It's a high rise. This gives everybody hot water for the building. This is not something we can put off. This is something we have to do right away. There's no, if this happens, you cut the check and you do it right away. So it's critical, do it. So this is how I would recommend you guys as board members look at prioritizing your reserve expenses. Look at it through that lens, and these two, we want to make sure those are our priority right there. So let's talk about fully funded balance. Fully funded balance is when the value of your deterioration is in balance with your reserve fund balance. So our ideal position is 100% funded. So let's talk about that. If we have a fully funded balance of $154,100, if we have $308,200, that puts us at 200% funded. What do we think about being 200% funded? Is that good or bad? Well, I would argue it's bad. We're overcharging our owners. Remember that there's a lot of math that goes to this. So if we're at 200% funded, we are overcharging our owners. So I would say we want to take our foot off the gas there. Either keep your dues steady for about 5 years and let inflation take care of that, or reduce your dues. What about if we're 50% funded? What does that tell us? We're underfunded. Now, it's not catastrophic though. So if you're 50% funded, you've only got a 10% chance of special assessment. That to me is okay. It tells me we've got to put our foot on the gas. We've got to get towards 100% funded, but it's not like we're 10% funded. In fact, what we'll see here is when you see percent funded is a strong indicator of special assessment risk. That's really one of the main factors that your reserve study is measuring, is your special assessment risk. So take a look here. And I talk about magic numbers in the reserve study. Look at what happens just if you get from under 30% funded to above 30% funded. So if you're in an association that's poorly funded, look at how much your special assessment risk drops if you just get above 30% funded. So if you're currently in a poorly funded association, don't panic. We want to start making assessment increases to get above 30% funded. Once we get there, we can get above 70% funded. Being above 70% funded and being at 100% funded, either one you really only have about a 1% chance of special assessment. So those are both great places to be. If you're above 70% funded, you're at about 30% of my clients are above 70% funded. So what your percent funded is going to do is it's going to reveal your risk of special assessments that we talked about. It's going to leave deferred maintenance, and those two go hand in hand. Higher net costs. Keeping dues low is penny wise and pound foolish, because what ends up happening is those poorly funded associations, ironically enough, end up having very high dues because they're just trying to throw money at problems to keep the dam from blowing up. So I have a lot of associations that are 10% funded and their dues are $700 a month because they're in panic mode. Declining home values. There is a 12% increase for associations that we work with their home values with similar associations are 12% higher than those that are under 30% funded. So it's a really bad decision to say I'm going to keep the dues $10 less a month when those of us who live in Orange County, if we get 12% more on our home value, that's a huge amount of money. It's worth $10 a month, right? And increased board liability. So the effects we're seeing on inflation is that every additional point of inflation increases reserve funding by just over 22%. So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And we had our statistician from our firm go through and examine that. So it's more like 22.08%. So it's hitting your reserve funds very hard. Now, the good news is that we are starting to get interest on our money. We hadn't gotten interest on our money for like the last 15 years, right? The problem is it's not enough. It doesn't offset the inflation we're having. We had the same statistician take a look, and the interest that we're getting now adds about 6.6%. So we still have about a 14% swing going up for how much reserve funding is being hit by this inflation. So remember that inflation works on the entire cost of the project. We got a lot of things that we're funding for, versus interest is only the cash on deposit. And I'm going to have to adjust this slide because of the inflation and the interest rates going up. But a lot of people will go, aha, here's what we'll do. We will take out a loan. Here's the problem. If we make reserve contributions for a $250,000 roof, we really only pay $231,000 for that roof because we've been getting interest on our money. If we get the magical special assessment, which is very hard to get because nobody votes to tax themselves, we'll still pay $250,000. But if we take out that loan, we're up almost $90,000 on a $250,000 expense. So loans are necessary sometimes, but I would say make that your last resort, because I don't know how many of you guys, if you had an extra $90,000 in your reserves, how much better would your community be, right? So what I'm going to encourage you guys to do is look at the $10 solution. What we do is we look at it, we say if you are poorly funded, if you could raise the dues $10 per unit per month and take all $10 and put it towards reserves, you'll see a dramatic increase in your reserve funding. And think about it, if you could do that, and one of the things going back to the magic numbers, most of us here are not going to throw a fit over a $10 increase, right? They do, for some reason, the magic number is $20. $20, people get really mad. So if you could do this for 3 years, all of a sudden dues have gone up and your reserve contribution's gone up $30. That's an enormous increase and you won't get the pushback. So as board members, really consider that $10 solution. Any questions, please go to our website, www.reservestudy.com. We give our software out for free upon completion of our reserve studies. We have a book you could order on Amazon, and we do a weekly podcast. So, and I'll be around if anybody has any questions.